Okay, so that brings us up to our seminar. And so we have Jeff Mello from Bootleg Biology here tonight. So it's going to be really, really good. I'm going to let Josh kind of do a little intro here and tell you what to expect.
Thank you, Jake. Before I introduce our main speaker, I do want to take a moment and thank Brian Rooney from BKS Artisan. He is with us in the audience on Zoom tonight.
Hi.
Thank you for joining us, Brian. Really glad to have you here. And you're welcome to come back.
Appreciate it.
I have a really great guest tonight, as you can see here. Jeff Mello, Chief Yeast Wrangler and founder of Bootleg Biology. He is been a home brewer for several years and a great resource for brewing and yeast in particular. He started the very first program to capture and catalog wild yeast all over the country, as well as other countries. He sources and provides or offers really unique and great yeast strains for home brewers and commercial brewers alike. And he also has for offer kind of an all-in-one kit for you to collect your own wild yeast in your backyard. So with that, let's please give a warm welcome for Jeff Miller.
Hey, thank you. Can you all hear me? Oh man, I'm like on Inception here. I can see myself on the wall through the screen. Well, I'm glad Mary and Brian are here because I'm big fans of those two. They've been big supporters of Bootleg Biology almost since the very moment we operated as a real deal big boy lab. So thank you both. I guess I want to just start off by saying, home brewer who kind of fell into the yeast lab world. I'm not a trained scientist. I think like a lot of people in the craft beer industry, I was an enthusiast first and foremost. I was someone whose ambition outstrapped my experience. And I think thankfully in this industry, whether it's craft beer or home brewing or just people who love good food, there's a willingness to share information, a willingness to give people a chance. And I think that's the reason I'm here talking to you all right now. So I'm the chief yeast wrangler of Bootleg Biology. So we are a yeast lab that's based in Nashville, Tennessee. Bootleg kind of got its start when I was living in the DC area. I was home brewing. I had actually quit my job. I had a lot of spare time, and I had read an article by Mike Tunsmeyer, the mad fermentationist, in BYO, and it was about basically capturing wild yeast. The goal was to make lambic style beer using wild sourced microbes. But the point of it was to get little source samples instead of doing like a full 5-gallon batch or larger and just opening it to the elements and hoping you find something good. It was about trying to get multiple samples, tasting them, hoping they attenuate, and then picking your favorite one and using that to pitch your 5-gallon batch. So I attempted that. I put mason jars full of wort in my backyard, in my garden. And then 24 hours later, I brought it inside my house and then just let them sit. I did not really know what I was doing. And in fact, everything that grew in those jars was pretty terrifying looking. I think one of them turned bright orange. So even to the untrained eye, it was very clear this was not something you'd want to imbibe. But as a home brewer who dared to tread where others had not, I did smell them, and one smelled like honey. It had a nice floral quality to it. And so I wanted to find that yeast. I knew it was in there somewhere. And so I went to the University of Google. I searched how to make an agar plate and how to isolate yeast. I had never done that in the past. I am actually a political science major. I was living in DC because of my love for politics. Thankfully, it worked. I streaked out an agar plate using just agar, which you can buy through the internet. It's food grade, mixed with DME, and isolated the first yeast strain that Bootleg has ever had, and we call it Arlingtonensis, which we now call ARL. Subsequently, we learned that it is a wild lager strain. It actually makes really nice lagers. So after that, I was hooked. I wanted to teach others how to source wild yeast. If I could do it in my home, then that means definitely anyone else can do it. So I started bootlegbiology.com, which is the idea of putting the basic information of what I did, the items that you need to acquire, and motivating people to do this from an amateur perspective, to kind of break down the wall between beer and science in a way that anyone with a kitchen and a little bit of homebrewing experience could pull it off. And that was my goal. As I continued to post about it, share about it, man, this was 10 years ago when Instagram was kind of a new thing. Now I'm sure people are doing this thing on TikTok, but I don't even have a TikTok account because that's how old I am. People started reaching out to me, and I learned about the community of other people who are trying to do unique things with beer, with wild yeast, and sharing that information. And so I learned a ton about wild cultures and isolation and purification and banking yeast cultures, primarily with the goal of making beer. And then I thought, well, why don't I try to catalog these cultures? Why don't I try to have people send me their cultures and I'll save them and preserve them, and we'll see if I can keep on building this database. I thought, why don't we try to get one from every zip code? It's just a audacious goal to get people to participate in something where it's as local as possible. And then at that point, I think I realized, I was like, oh, if I'm ever going to do this, I probably need to find a way to pay for it. I probably need a job at some point. That'd probably be a positive thing. And so the idea of starting a real yeast lab came next. Eventually moved to Nashville, Tennessee, and kind of started the business for real there. Launched the Backyard Yeast Wrangling Toolkit, which was mentioned. Has everything you need to find wild yeast cultures and isolate it and purify it yourself. No real specialized tools besides what's in that kit. And then it includes an envelope for if you find a yeast sample, you can send it to us at Bootleg, and then we'll bank it for free. You'll have it forever. Since we've been doing this now for a decade, people like Mary and Brian have sent their wild yeast samples to us, and they've been in our freezer, and they've launched breweries, and they've launched beer brands, and they've used the local yeast project and our bank as a way to preserve those house cultures that they found, and then they can get access to them at any time, and they don't have to worry about preserving them. We can grow up a pitch for home brewers or for professional brewers to any size whenever it's needed. And that's kind of something I didn't anticipate when we launched the local yeast project, is that people would be able to release commercial beers with these wild yeast samples that they had sourced and had entrusted to us to bank. That is the really fun thing that we do. But beyond that, we are a real deal yeast lab that does lots of yeast and bacteria cultures that aren't necessarily from the local yeast project. We produce lager cultures. We produce ale cultures for IPAs. We send Brian and Mary a lot of IPA yeast, which is awesome. I love it because I like IPA. Most everyone else does to some extent. I love wild yeast and I love wild beers, but the vast majority of beer being made and drank right now in America, at least, is clean ales and lagers, and that's the majority of what we actually do. We do mixed cultures that are customized as well. Since we have such a deep bank of yeast cultures, whether it's from the local yeast project, things that brewers or home brewers have sent to us, or things that we've just come across from our travels or from bottles that we've sourced, people can reach out to us and say, hey, I got a fun barrel project and I kind of want this flavor profile. Can you help build me a custom blend? And we can do that. We can pick a specific strain of Brett and a specific species of lacto, and build a unique blend that's unique to someone's brewery or home brewery. We've sent yeast cultures all over the world. I actually just shipped out a pitch to Finland today. I didn't even know that people in Finland knew who Bootleg Biology was, but there's a brewery who wants custom pitches every few months. There's a distillery in Norway that actually distills near the Arctic Circle, and they'll occasionally email me and go, I got a fun idea for a yeast pitch. And I'll be like, all right, let's do it. This is crazy. I can't believe you're doing anything near the Arctic Circle. But it just shows you that if you have a crazy idea in this world and you think it's going to taste good, there's an audience for it. And there are crazy people like myself who want to make your dreams come true. And I feel like that is another thing I didn't think about when I started Bootleg, was that, hey, I want to make this my life. I want to do fun, unique things in craft beer, and I want to push the limits of how you make beer or wine or whatever. But I don't think I realized that people would be executing some kind of cool vision, whether it's in their home or their professional lives, with our assistance. I can't take credit for a lot of things, but if we can contribute one ingredient to something, I think it's really cool. I think another fun story is for the local yeast project. Someone proposed to their wife at a specific park, national park, and for their wedding, they wanted to brew a beer with a yeast from that specific location. And then every year he does an anniversary brew, making a different style, but using that same yeast that he sourced from that location. So it's a culture that's very specific to him and his wife that they sourced. And all we've done is isolate it and purify it, and we propagate it for when he needs it. But we're at least get to be some part of that special process that's unique to them. And I think as someone in craft beer, most of us are doing this because we feel passionate about making good food, because beer is food, about being creative. On my end, Bootleg is how I pay the bills. Thankfully, I get to do that. But also, hopefully, I can open people's eyes as to how easy science is. I know it's really hard through kind of like a Zoom call or any kind of just general talk to get too into the weeds on what we do. I definitely am just kind of spouting off, but I welcome any question, no matter how complicated or bizarre or unique or basic you feel it is. I want to answer it. Only reason we're doing what we're doing is because a lot of people answered my questions, like Mike Tunsmeyer. He was in my homebrew club. He's the reason why I started Bootleg, and he's the reason why we have the Mad Fermentationist Saison blends. We've been releasing it through Bootleg Biology for over 5 years now. Because of that, we've made connections with all kinds of talented brewers and breweries like BKS. We sell Jester King's house culture, the Rare Barrel, Embrace the Funk, Black Project. These breweries that I've looked up to, I respect them. They've won all kinds of awards, and they enjoy working with us and trust us with our microbes. That's something that I think can only exist in our industry as craft brewers, as home brewers, as people who like experimenting and are willing to take risks on people who have unique visions. So beyond that, we also do laboratory testing. We do quality control testing for breweries. We do gluten testing. We do IBU and SRM testing, some kind of basic stuff, just to help a lot of breweries who don't have labs or have the time or the skill set to do some of those kind of things that help them with quality control. That's kind of the basics of bootleg biology and who I am and how we started. That's not, I don't know if it's much of a presentation, but I'd love to just open up the floor or just ask Brian and Mary questions, because I want to know what you guys think, because you guys are wonderful. So actually, Brian, will you tell me about your culture? Because I don't know if I know much of the story about the culture that you sent to me.
Oh yeah,
Way back when. I don't know. This was
long
like,
time ago.
yeah, many.
Yeah, I think we started reaching out to you in 2016.
Wow.
Before it started in 2017. We opened our doors in October of 2017, and so around that time, I was, I mean, of course, I was home brewing before opening the brewery, and I was really into IPAs, but I was really like into like lambic inspired beers, mixed fermentation, and I thought we'd do a lot of that when we opened BKS, and then, you know, I would say consumer trends around a lot of that stuff changed like right when we opened. And so luckily people kept drinking IPAs, so we just went with that. But we had a really cool culture. So Mary's from northeastern Arkansas, and her dad has a 5,000 acre cattle ranch out there. And I got interested actually from reading Mad Fermentationists and like reading some of your discussion content on Milk the Funk. That's actually how I knew about you. You said we started getting yeast from you back in the early days because I followed all that stuff, and I admired and respected some of the stuff that you were talking about, and some of the research that you did. And so I had the courage to go out there and start looking for wild yeast and like finding ways to capture it. And so I woke up about 5 a.m. one day, and literally I went out and I got blackberries and leaves from a blackberry bush way out on their property. Her dad took me out like on one of those John Deere Gators or whatever, and we went way out. And he thought I was crazy. I had like Erlenmeyer flasks in my hand, like I had cooked up like
like normal people do.
Yeah, some wort on the stove. Yeah, 5 a.m. Totally normal stuff, like on a Saturday morning. And it seems like a scene from Breaking Bad or something at this point. But we go out there, and I pulled some of the blackberries and the leaves off of there, and I dropped them into the Erlenmeyer flask and started growing it and bringing the culture up to further strength until I actually saw something viable that was occurring in there. I saw some normal looking pellicle. I definitely saw some attenuation. I didn't know what was in it. I wanted to find out, so I sent it to you, and we actually isolated a sac strain out of there. We isolated a lactobacillus strain, which still lives on in our mixed fermentation culture. We use that in every mixed fermentation beer we ever release at BKS. And now we do like just one per year. We do a really longer range fermentation with just this one beer that we just kind of let go and use some different like Brett and different microbes in there to kind of see how it goes. But we always have that lactobacillus that's in there, and it came from whatever was going on out there. And then we also isolated a Brettanomyces strain. So we got like 3, from there, and it's banked with you. And in our early days, we actually tried doing a pale ale just with that sac strain, and it was a hit. I've never tried it again. I guess I need to.
You have to now. Now this is being recorded, so people can.
That's kind of how we did it, and I had ideas to do a lot more of those types of things, and then the IPA train ran away, and so. Yeah, we might revisit some of these things, and it's good to know that you still have those things banked there, and they're safe, and we can access them at any time, and we still do occasionally.
Yeah, we We get a interesting bump of pro brewers who order wild yeast or their wild yeast house cultures around this time period. I think, people will try to brew according to the lambic calendar. Being in this industry, I think that makes sense. But also, I think I don't run a brewery, but I assume, in the cold weather months, things slow down a little bit. I imagine you're just like, I maybe have some time to think about a new unique project, like I don't know how when you're coming up with a mixed culture beer plan versus a clean beer, like I assume the thought process is different or how you think you're going to achieve something. Like when you're looking to create a mixed culture beer, is your vision or expectations different for when you're envisioning a clean beer from start to finish?
For sure. I mean, we have a much longer time frame to work with. So the kind of the way I do it right now is we have a set base, like a grist that we like, and we kind of have gone through that over the years, understanding like which ones will hold up through fermentation. Like you need to have some hardy, robust wort that goes into there to hang in for like a year and give some of these interesting Brett and Pediococcus strains, because I'm sure there's some that's in there. And then we always take a little bit from the last one and basically inoculate the wort for the next one with some of that, but then whatever other Brett or Pediococcus or any other things that we want to like roll with for the next batch. So it's always kind of like a handoff from like the last batch into the next one. So it's like a continuation. It has a piece of it in there, and then we expand upon it. Like I don't know if thinking like this batch that's going like right now that we bottled, it's actually going to take a really long time to condition in bottles because it took a very long time to reach an acceptable point of maturation in these little mini foeders that we have. But we pulled some dregs off of it's a brewery called Floodlands out of Seattle, Washington, and my friend here in Kansas City, Nick Mater, who runs Alma Mater Brewing, brought a bottle back. And I saw it at his house, and I said, "Whenever you open that, I want to beat it.
Give me those drugs.
I know what's in that." And he said, "Sure," because he doesn't do any mixed fermentation. So we actually opened the bottle here, and we flamed the top of it and added the dregs into there. And I'm really happy with it. It actually shows some of the characteristics that were in that beer that I tried. And so that's kind of the fun stuff about all this stuff is you can be a little more flexible. It's just like where you are at that moment. And then mixed fermentation beer it's a lot like, I don't know, I guess the best way to think of it is like it just captures a piece of time, like where you were thinking about things. And then you finally get to taste it like a year and a half later, but you're already on to some other aspect of doing something different. And I don't know, there's something nice to appreciate it, but then there's also something like, this isn't as good as I can do it. It always changes. It's kind of like this pursuit, this like fun little chase,
Yeah, and I think I like talking to brewers who do that. Whether you call it a Solera, like there's all kinds of way of describing that process, and I'm sure the way Americans do it, is different from old world techniques. But I think a lot of times people, even when you're doing things like that where you're reusing it but you're like adding a few new cultures in there, I think most brewers I've come across are like, I still know what my house flavor is. Like I know what that base was, and I don't know if it's like muscle memory or you just know what your beers taste like. But even when you change it, if you're reusing it, you can pick up those flavors. And I just wonder if that's like just your preference on what you like, or if you feel like you've kind of inoculated your brewery or your vessel and you're still going to get a little bit of something carried over from batch to batch.
Yeah, I think the vessel that we have, the two that we have, definitely these were French oak Chardonnay barrels that have been inverted, and we sent them to foeder crafters to basically make them look like miniature foeders. They put manways on the tops, sample ports where the bung used to be on there, and then a dump port on the bottom. And we do actually clean them out between every use and then refill. But those that Brett will it gets into the staves. It goes way deep into there and stays, and then also whatever else is in there. And I feel like our first many rotations of brewing the beer, I think we're like on our we did a lot quicker turns earlier. Like we're using a quicker mixed fermentation idea in the beginning, and I think that really took hold in those barrels. And so now we're going longer, and we're using things that are more advantageous for a longer fermentation, at least as far as getting the profile we're looking for. But I think that the earlier batches that we did in 2017 and 2018 with that blend, they still show up in there just because they have a residency. They took early residency in those barrels, and it just continues to go. And it's like there's always this piece that where, at least if I'm tasting it, I feel like it's something I know from our culture, from our bootleg. We call it the beer de ferme, beer of farm culture.
Nice.
Because it is the yeast from Mary's dad's farm. And so I always feel like I can taste that. There's a piece of that in there.
You can taste the Arkansas in there. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Mary's like, I've lived it. I don't need to taste it.
So that actually kind of brings me to one of the questions I had. I don't want to interrupt you guys, but I'd like to open a couple questions if I could.
Yeah,
to the audience. One of the questions I had for you, Jeff, was that in one of your previous seminars, you had kind of discussed the study that was done at the Cantillon facility and their environment and their all their fermenters and stuff like that, and no Brett anomalies isolates were found. And I just was curious, in your opinion, if we're being maybe a little too concerned with cross-contamination of Bretts when we're using some of the same, equipment.
Yeah, definitely. I would say environmentally, we're out there in the wild and we're trying to look for Brett. Oh man, it takes time and it's not easy, and you're more likely, highest likelihood, hey, I'm giving you all the instructions to, get something for the local yeast project. You're most likely going to find SAC, mostly because we are looking for a yeast strain that ferments beer, and SAC is prolific in the environment. It's in honey. It's part of the circle of life. Yeah, that's different from a domesticated Chico strain, but it's out there and you can find it. The concern with diastaticus yeast strains is very real. That's usually the biggest concern I have when people are worried about cross-contamination, not necessarily Brett. Brett isn't like a super bug. It's not indestructible. The biggest concern with Brett usually is it doesn't take many cells for it to be flavor expressive in your beer. So if you did make a Brett Pale Ale, I love that style of beer, and then came back in and tried to make a straight up American West Coast Pale Ale, and you got a very small amount of contamination there, you'd probably pick it up, at least if you were familiar with what Brett flavors are like. But that being said, usually as a wild contaminant, say you're just being loosey-goosey with sanitation, or you're just like, hey, I'm going to go make a beer out while I'm camping or something, which sounds awesome, you're probably more likely to pick up a wild SAC strain. And most wild SAC strains are STA1 positive. They're diastatic strains, meaning they're ones that are like a Saison yeast, which they're phenolic and are prone to over attenuation compared to a normal brewer's yeast strain like 001 or an English ale strain or something like that. That's more likely what you're going to pick up. And that's what, when we do QC for breweries, hardly ever do we actually see Brett in those breweries when it comes to something that's contaminated. Usually it is a diastatic yeast strain, and that's the number one concern. That being said, if you have really good cleaning protocols, you can kill it. It's not a big deal. But I do know some breweries who were like, hey, we're not even going to make saisons on the same equipment. We're not even going to make saisons in the same building just to be extra safe. And that's usually a bigger concern. But that being said, you can get cross contamination from your lager yeast into your English ale. I mean, that's totally possible, but usually small amounts of those things, when they cross pollinate your beer, you may not necessarily know it unless you've made that beer like 100 times and you have dialed it in, and you know what your attenuation's like, you know what your flavor profile is like, and you know how it ferments at a specific temperature. When a brewer, whatever scale they're working on, and they've done that, they can pick up some of those differences. And usually brewers know when something is contaminated before you have any kind of smoking gun. And usually when a sample ends up at Bootleg for testing, the brewer already knows that there's a problem. We're just kind of confirming it for them. But to the question about the Cantillon study, that's a really cool study. That was done years ago at this point, and there's been further research, and there's all kinds of species of Brett out there. The ones that we're most familiar with are the ones that are kind of endemic to lambic breweries, and I think a lot of that is actually because they're getting their Brett from inadvertent inoculation of their beers from reusing barrels. Like Brian was saying, it's like, man, once you get them in the staves, they're ready to live their rest of their lives for many generations. And so if you're reusing a barrel that has had Brett in it, you usually don't even have to add it if you want to get it in there on some level. So.
Awesome. Do we have any questions in the audience?
I got a question. Hey, Jeff, I was just wondering, so like, when you get those yeast and the wild yeast, are you testing all of them? Are you brewing beers from each of them to get kind of the yeast profile for what it kicks out? Or is it just some of them?
When we started off, we were doing all those things, and then at some point it became incredibly difficult to test everything. So for the moment, at right now, if you were to send us a yeast culture, we would isolate it, purify it, bank it. You're zoomed in. You have a lovely beer. I'm very much impressed. But I don't think I can hear you. I think I lost your. Give that man a microphone.
I was having a conversation with Mr. Rooney recently about his reluctance to brew me a Belgian double or quad. I started going over your research, and quite honestly, I had never heard anything like that. I just thought he was full of shit, like he didn't want to do it. But now that it's coming from somebody else's mouth, I somewhat believe him. Though, do you have a good yeast strain in there that could produce what we like to see from like a Rochefort or a Westfalen? So Rooney could brew me a Belgian double or quad and not have it mess up his subsequent brews.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, we'll make it happen. Yeah, totally.
That's what I'm talking about.
Anything you ask for.
Thank you.
I'm all for it, as long as there's not diastaticus.
How about Brian comes to your house and brews the beer on your equipment? How about that?
That's actually the better option. He makes really good pizza, so I'll go to his house anytime.
Okay. So do we have another question from the audience at all? Jake?
One had a question about Hazy Boys in the chat. I saw that.
What can you tell me about the origin of your killer beer strain, and when will it be available again?
Oh man. Well, the origin, much like many a good story, involved too much drinking. I went to Carnival Brett in 2018. If y'all haven't heard of that, it's a really fun beer festival that occurs in Amsterdam. It used to be in June of every year. They paused it for a couple of years because of COVID. But basically, it's a a festival that is almost exclusively devoted to people making wild and mixed culture beers. Have heavy American presence, because I think just for the past decade or so, the Americans maybe have done a lot of the innovation in that realm of brewing. But obviously hosting it in Europe, you get to have some legendary traditional mixed culture wild breweries show up and put on presentations, get to bump elbows with people from Cantillon, Pierre Tilken. He's a very surly Belgian guy, but he is very knowledgeable, and I got to talk to him a little bit. So just a really great meeting of the minds, and a beer festival that's devoted to that style of brewing. But you get a bunch of brewers together, what they're going to drink is a lot of lager a lot of times. So there was one beer event that it was exclusively all German Keller lagers served, and I don't even know what the term is, but they were essentially opened up and poured for the very first time, almost like I guess like an English cask, but a German Keller lager served that way. And there was a particular beer that I enjoyed quite a lot, and I took a sample and put it in a tube and stuck it in my pocket, and it eventually ended up in Nashville, and we isolated and purified it and banked it, and then forgot about it for, I don't know, 3 or 4 years. And then we were like, hey, let's release some lager cultures, and we're like, wait, we tested that strain, it's really good. So while we call FKL Franconian Keller Lager because the brewery is a Franconian brewery, it was a Keller Lager. You don't have to use it for Keller beers. I particularly love that type of beer, something that's fresh, that in some ways is unrefined, that is very yeast heavy, I'd say. But you certainly could traditionally ferment it, and try to get as neutral of a flavor profile as possible and remove any kind of sulfur qualities, and get a nice clean, clear beer out of it. So I think there's a high chance that we'll be releasing it in the spring. I haven't decided yet what we'll be releasing in our spring homebrew release, but we do quarterly releases, semi-quarterly releases, where we usually release a beta strain. But we released that culture and our Czech lager culture in the summer, and we've gotten a lot of really positive feedback from those cultures. We'll likely release them again, and if people like them, then we will probably add them to the culture or the culture list year round. So
Awesome. So
yeah,
we have started pouring the first beer. So if you guys want to grab your Jeff and Brian, if you want to grab those bottles, did you guys receive those?
Yeah.
We did send them beer. Yeah. Sorry that we were moving things. But I want to get to the question that's in the chat as well. So like we can start getting these poured. I think everybody's got it poured. But we can maybe see
Which one do we start with? Which one are we all
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did not tell you that. So the first one is the parfait. Saison parfait.
Okay.
I'm gonna grab mine.
I'm going to give a little detail on kind of how these beers were made. And then once we get to kind of a lull in between, I'd like to have that chat question answered. So can I move this slide? Next slide, John. Oh, yeah. I got some tasting slides. So basically, sure can't. Yeah, that's what I'm pushing.
Are you all able to point us at the screen?
All right, yeah, we got it. Okay, so
oh, sweet, there you go. I love it.
For the tasting, Jared, Angelo, and I made a 20-gallon batch of just a simple Saison-based recipe, mostly Pilsen malt, a little bit of wheat, a little bit of oats, and some dextrin malt. small bittering charge of Cascade, just to get about 20 IBUs with an original gravity of about 1053. The purpose of that is to kind of give the yeast the main stage. So for the yeasts, we purchased the Tis the Saison bundle from Bootleg Biology, and that came with Saison Parfait, Dour Saison, Belgian Farmhouse Blend, and one beer that's not here tonight is the Coquetti Wild Yeast. And the reason for that is that it ended up under attenuating. And I think a part of that is, we didn't create any yeast starters for these batches. Temperature control wasn't really a thing, so we didn't raise the temperatures up. And maybe there wasn't enough nutrient or enough oxygen.
You can blame me too. You can just say the yeast lab messed that one up.
I'm not going to do that.
Throw me under the bus.
But what we did do is we took the slurry from the Belgian Farmhouse Blend, because that contains Brettanomyces, and pitched that in after everything was done. So we're hoping, with a little time that, that Brett will start eating some of those sugars, those more complex sugars, and we'll get a little drier of a beer. So maybe we'll have that in the future.
So when was everything pitched?
So we rushed this quite a bit because of my lack of planning. So we got the yeast delivered with about maybe 30 days, maybe 35 days until tonight. So we brewed the day we got it, so it's been, 3.5 weeks, 4 weeks.
Yeah. Okay.
So pretty rushed, especially for the Brett culture, but so I'm not going to go and talk about beer number 1 too much, other than, the yeast is Saison Parfait. Things you should be looking for here is, a little bit of a peppery spice, juicy citrus, and maybe some hits of banana. And that's from the description there. The attenuation you can see is 90 to 100%, so it should have ended up pretty dry. And I think if we had pushed these beers in temperature up closer to like the 80s or high 70s, you would have a little more accentuation on that. But while you guys are tasting that, if you're still tasting that, I don't know if we have time to answer a question in between here or not, but.
It tastes like it's got some.
So, the big part of that is make everything that's made
And the banana. Yeah.
everything that's made in Miami.
So how do you get is it, the oats, it was 4% oats or something? How does this yeast kick out full body, because it is full body and silky mouthfeel, despite did you do the attenuation at the end? Is it dry as bone or?
So I don't have the final gravities with me tonight. Angelo, who's in the chat, might have them, because it's on his data. So I'm not sure, how dry we ended up on this one in particular, but I believe it was fully taken.
Really good.
I would say to give you all some insight in that blend is it's actually 2 different yeast cultures. Internally, we call them 83B and 87. 83B is probably one of my favorite Saison strains of all time, but it is a terrible attenuator as a Saison strain, which is really unusual. And so to fix that problem, we tested out several other strains that were also Saison strains, but were far better at attenuating. So usually 83B gives more of a silky, fruitier Saison character. You get a touch of that banana from that. And then 87 is our workhorse Saison strain. And that one does usually most of the heavy lifting of the attenuation and usually gives more of the classic pepper quality and responds best to higher fermentation temperatures. But the 2 of them together, I think, hopefully, and I'm open to criticisms on it, but the 2 of them together create a unique Saison flavor that you don't usually find just from a pure single strain Saison yeast.
Yeah, please. So we're already moving on to beer number 2. I'm sorry, Jack and Ryan, beer number 2 is the Dower. Dower Saison. Yeah, I should have probably given you more instruction on having multiple glasses. Oh, you didn't send them a whole crowd? So number 2 is the Dower Saison East. It is a beta, so it's potentially a one-time only release based on the response. I'm hoping that this actually becomes a core release because I particularly like the Dower. According to the description, you should be getting more of an earthy or spicy, profile with a dry, slightly temperated tart. And again, like I did before, I think especially this one, if we could have gotten it up to the 80s, it would just be, so easy to.
I'm really curious on feedback because I particularly like this strain a lot. I don't think it's as characterful as Saison Parfait, but I think in general it's a little more balanced, and I think you could do a little more fun work with different types of hops to bring out different elements of Saisons that you might like. So I'd really be curious on everyone's feedback on what they think, whether you want to send me an email or something later, and just thoughts on it, because if you like it, then we'll release it again.
And so it's a highly regarded family Saison brewery near the French-Belgian border. Is there a name? Good. Or is that something you're supposed to know?
I don't. The Belgians might be watching me right now.
Does anybody have any thoughts on this beer or picking out any of the notes that we talked about?
I like it a lot better.
Yeah.
It's a little more complex, it's a little bit more attenuated, a little bit more. It's got more of a spice flavor to it. One of it's just kind of too round and smooth, especially for what I expect out of a Saison.
Yeah. I'm very sensitive to bananas, so the first one was very like a Hefe and a Saison had a baby, whereas this one is what I think of a lot more like a traditional Saison strain. Got these nice phenols, but also balanced.
I prefer the first one, which I love Saisons in general. I feel like this is a more approachable for the common person.
Who you call that's period and your palate.
I like the first one a lot, but this is a more traditional profile for a Belgian Saison. The first one, if I would have tasted the first one in competition, it would have kind of thrown me a little bit. Good, bad, or indifferent. It's just this is more typical of what I think of when I think of Belgian Saison.
Yeah, Belgian Saison.
Yeah. Cool. So we've got number 3 going around, but I think we have time to answer Angelo's question that was in the chat. I don't remember exactly what that was, but it was for Brian from Loco Brew, which is Angelo. Okay. So Brian, any tips on dry hopping protocols for hazy boys?
Okay, since we're talking about Saisons, right? Like we're talking about dry hopping for hazy stuff. I was like, one, definitely use Citra hops, and then use whatever else you want with it. I like dry hopping in 2 stages. I break it into two, and the reason for that is I think you get better absorption into the wort. But I think about it from like a home brewing standpoint. If you've got like a 5-gallon carboy, or if like you're lucky enough to have like a 10-gallon conical or something like that, you need to break that into stages, because even if you're pulsing or doing any of those things, a lot of that stuff sits up on top, and you just want to make sure it gets absorbed into there. So I was like, definitely break it into two. The other thing is I've heard a lot of stuff about biotransformation of hops, like with yeast, all that stuff. Trust me, I've tried it. I'm not a big fan of that stuff. Dry hopping like in the mid or towards the end of fermentation. There's some people that do it and it works out really great for them and they like it. I think it's just treat it like the old days with like West Coast IPA. Wait till everything's terminal, get the yeast out of there, and then do your dry hopping. And then don't give the hops a lot of residency on the beer. Hops are hydrophobic, like the hop oils are. They want to return back to the vegetal matter, and so if you're looking for, like, a lot of people talk about hop creep right now, meaning like fermentation will kick back up like once you start doing dry hopping, because some of the enzymes that are in the hops will facilitate a re-fermentation. I think some of that does happen. Sometimes it doesn't. It just depends on what farm you get them from or how long they were kilned or not kilned for. There's a lot of factors that go into it. But if you're measuring those types of things and after a couple of days there's not really anything happening, I'd say get that stuff out of there. Get it off the hops. You don't need to leave it on there. It's just absorbing vegetal matter, aroma and flavor. And so we don't give it a lot of residency on any of the hop matter. As soon as we do our dry hopping, we're pretty short with that. We have a pretty short window, and then we get it out of there and we get it into a bright tank. Or if you're thinking about that on a homebrew scale, you're getting it into a corny keg, starting your carbonation. So that's what I would say. I was like, don't overcomplicate it. Use fresh hops, eliminate oxygen at every step, purge excessively. That's the best thing you can do.
Awesome, thank you. And I have so many questions to follow up, but we'll save that hopefully for another meeting, maybe. So we passed out beer number 3, which is the Belgian Farmhouse Blend. And this one is a little bit different. This is a blend of like a Saccharomyces, like a Belgian L yeast, a Brettanomyces, and Lactobacillus. So you should be getting a little bit more funk than any of the other beers. You know, and had we not hopped it, that Lactobacillus would have kind of taken off a little bit more, and you would get a little more tart than we're getting. But overall, I love this blend personally. You guys have any thoughts on this third one?
It's great.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is good.
When did you start fermentation? When did you start fermentation? So it's been I don't know the exact date. We probably started fermenting just about like 30 days ago or something.
All this stuff over there.
So this was down in Jared's basement, and he did not have the ability to like kind of control these individually. So it's room temperature, about 70 degrees, 69, 70.
Did you track temperature in the room at all or in the fermentation at all?
No. Have you met Jared? Yeah, we don't track. There is a piece of cardboard, I think, with some notes on it somewhere. So.
But the only difference between these 3 is the yeast?
Yes, yeah, this is the exact same beer. It's a 20-gallon batch split into 4 different fermenters, treated exactly the same, all right next to each other. So yeah, it's just the yeast that delivers these profiles.
I can't wait to see how this beer develops with more time.
And so we split the kegs evenly. Everybody got a keg to choose from. to keep, and I actually got to keep this one, which I'm very happy with.
Good call.
Of course, we are all allowed to come to each other's houses and taste it anytime.
So what kind of fermentation temperature do you recommend on these 3 strains? To actually develop more of a-
Start low and go high. I think that's usually a nice profile to work with on Belgian beers in general. Usually, if you can get it as hot as possible, that's easier to achieve, I think, usually on the homebrew scale. Or in the middle of summer, you can you can knock out your wort in a low 60s and kind of let it free rise and stick it in the warmest part of your house. That makes it easy. Usually some of these Saison strains can be pretty finicky, even when they can attenuate really well. That's not always actually really easy to do, sadly. And usually it's either a combination of temperature, cell density, or even oxygen. Usually a lot of the problems we see with attenuation are under oxygenation of beers, yeast starters, and that kind of thing.
So the pack size you have, do you have a estimated cell count, or how large of a starter you recommend making off those?
Yeah, the standard cells in each pack is at least 100 billion. Usually, we actually just incidentally end up packing the Saisons a little bit higher cell density, just because it's on our side a little bit easier to package more cells in Saisons, weirdly enough, just because of the diameter of the yeast cell size. But almost everything that we produce, I would just say make a 500 ml starter per 5 gallons. It's an easy rule of thumb for anything that's like in the ale realm, whether it's wild or Saison or even an English ale. Just do 500 mils per 5 gallons, 24 hours at room temp, and you're usually going to get a good cell density. Pitching rates in I think my opinion are pretty subjective. You can hardly go wrong with too many cells or more than you think. Usually lagers are the one style where your pitch rate is like absolutely crucial, or at least going big is always going to be your best friend. Some people have strong feelings on under pitching Saisons, even other cultures like Kawaiic Norwegian yeast. I don't have strong feelings on those. My main goal, and this is just because I'm a yeast guy, is always the healthiest fermentation and driving it to move as quickly as possible, to attenuate, to hit the numbers that you want. If you pick the right yeast strain and generally hit your numbers, you're usually going to end up what you want. And under pitching 10%, I don't think is really going to do much to move the needle as far as your flavor profile, but that's my opinion, you know.
You did, I mean, if you started room temperature, or, mid 60s or something, if you were controlling fermentation temperature, how high would you recommend ramping those up to, and at what rate?
I would say the first couple of days, just letting it gradually stay in that 60-degree realm. But after 3, 4, if it's a healthy yeast pitch, if you see attenuation driving down considerably, you see your airlock popping off, you know that you're having a really nice aggressive fermentation. It's okay to start bumping it up the temperature wise. I wouldn't, 2 days in, you don't see any CO2 activity bumping up to 80, because it means something isn't right yet. And I don't think getting it super warm at that point would be advisable. You want to go it slow and low initially, and then get it happy. Side note, if you all ever come to Nashville, I'd be happy to give you a tour of our facility. We have we live Bootleg Biology, Brian and Mary. You see, we live Bootleg. We are not a fancy yeast facility, but on the propagation side, everything is propagated extremely warm. Our propagation room is held at about 88 degrees Fahrenheit. Yeast are fine with that. and even lager yeast. We grow our lager yeast at that temperature. When we isolate yeast, when we do our quality control plates, we have incubators for those agar plates, and those sit at 35 Celsius, which is about around 95 Fahrenheit. So yeast are fine with that. It doesn't necessarily kill yeast. So like I get a lot of concerns, especially in the summer, because we ship homebrew packs direct. Did my yeast die because it sat in the mailbox for a couple hours? And the answer is usually isn't. I would say in the entire history of bootleg biology, I probably have only had people, I think, really lose all viability in their culture less than a dozen times. It's pretty rare, and usually things can be revived, and high temps isn't usually the end of the world for most yeast cultures.
So Jake, we need to see about adding to that events thing you had, a slide you had.
Yes, please. I need a hot chicken. Stats.
Yes, it's.
Right, not the same.
Excellent.
But not the same.
Take some about it for event.
Yeah, more.
Okay, well, thanks, Frank. Frank is pushing me off stage here, so just so everybody knows it's not me. I actually have a couple more questions.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please, Jeff.
I ask this question every time I give a talk of any kind. Is I want to know your craziest capture wild fermentation story. I want to know the most ridiculous thing you've ever attempted. Someone's got to have something that's even blows my mind every time it happens.
I've got one.
We have one over here.
It was supposed to be an IPA. It was in a warehouse, it was warm. During the fermentation, there was wasp flying around all the time. So I'm going to bottle the beer, this wasp dives into the gourd. And it turned it into, I guess it was a Saison by the time it was done. I've made that same IPA many times, but that wasp, whatever yeast he was carrying, changed it completely. It was pretty good.
You should have sent it to us. We would have cultured it for you, and we could have made it happen.
So we're gonna do one more question. Or one more experience.
Yeah, it's not a question, and it's not out of the ordinary, but I used to have beer parties at my house where we would have, all kinds of saisons and all kinds of lambics, and we capture all the yeast from it and make beers. And so actually the guys that run City Barrel, Grant has a beer called Stinger's Basement. And so I've got a bottle of that. It's probably 10 years old now. So Jeff, when I pop that one, I'll go ahead and flame it and send you a copy of it. But it's got, it must have 15 different cultures in it from all kinds of different stuff. So it ought to be kind of fun to sift through and see what all the hell's in there.
Chris, I've got a 3 of it too.
Oh, do you? Nice.
Yeah, if you want to pop the bigger one, send the small one.
Maybe we'll take it over to Bruni's since we're pretty good at that.
Okay. And I got one more from Jake.
Nice. Awesome.
What is your favorite cask ale strain?
Is that for me or Brian?
Yes.
For you.
For John. Yeah.
I want to know Brian's because he doesn't tell me.
Well, Jeff, it's yours.
Yeah.
He knows which one. It's one of, we use only 2 English strains for I guess 3, but there's only like 2 that we'd use in like traditional or like classic English beers, and they both come from Bootleg, so you can just guess.
I will say Brian has been a big proponent of our Conan strain. I don't know if he's using it for his casks. I assume not. But that is a strain that we isolated from a heady topper can. That strain has similar parentage as other Conan strains that are commercially available. I would let Brian talk to what his feelings are on IPA yeast strains, because I do appreciate his insight on those. But I think it just goes to show that when someone says, I have a Conan strain or I have a Chico strain, they're not all the same. Every lab has a different variation of something, and while they may be similar, in no way are they exactly the same.
Yeah. I totally agree with that. We had trialed many different Conan variants, and in fact, I wasn't even sold on Conan because I didn't get the performance out of some of the other ones from other different yeast banks that I had tried that I had thought that a Conan strain might provide until I tried the bootleg one, and it was just I love Heady Topper. First of all, anybody who's ever tried it, it's it's amazing beer. But I think there's like this. There is this stone fruit character that we drive through fermentation that is only produced through Jeff's Conan yeast strain, and I do not believe that I found it anywhere else in any other Conan strain. And I think it's because of where they sourced it from. They did a fantastic job isolating it out of whichever can of Heady we had, and it's so good, man. And I've turned a lot of other people on to it. And it's interesting when I try it from other breweries, it's just a little bit different every time. So it's like your environment that you ferment in, and your water source, and how you treat pH, all those things all go into the expressiveness of that yeast strain, but they all still have a certain lineage. Like I can tell that it's like that one when I try it. It's different than the other Conan strains that I try from in beer, for sure.
Awesome. I want to thank both of you. We are going to move on to the official tasting, which is actually all Bootleg Biology yeast as well. But these are in a commercial capacity. So, I mean, please stick around if you guys have time and you want to be a part of that. You know, and if we have the ability to have a couple seconds, we can do that. But anyways, we do have the yeast drawing to do. Did everybody have an opportunity to put their name in the fermenter, the back corner of this room? Yep.
Round of applause for.
Yeah. Yes, please.
I do need to, I think, say goodbye because I need to do some bedtime stuff for the family. But can I just say thank you all for inviting me. Thank you for inviting Brian, because I got to enjoy talking to Brian and learn from Brian, which I do every time we talk. And I really appreciate you getting together, sharing your information, sharing your creativity, asking good questions. If you have anything that you learned and that you want to share with us, I would happy to have a meeting of the minds by email. You all should have my email, but it's jmello@bootlegbiology.com. Feel free to email or reach us on Instagram or Facebook. I love just learning about what your brewing projects are too. You know, home brewing is the creative energy of craft beer, because when you're home brewing, you get to take risks that professionals don't get to do. And I think if it wasn't for people doing that on a daily basis, we would be missing something overall in the craft beer industry. So thank you for sharing that with me. Thank you for supporting Bootleg and letting me do what I do for a living. Because man, I couldn't do this if I didn't have the energy and the support of people who like beer and weird microbes. So thank you to Brian for that too. And thank you all for having me and supporting Bootleg. Cheers. Cheers, y'all. All right, thank you. Hopefully I'll get to come by a real meeting sometime. We'll stop by BKS and get a beer beforehand.
Sounds good.
We would love that very much. Thank you so much, Jeff.
All right, thank you all. Have a good one.
Okay, so I think what we'll do is we'll go ahead and move to the official tasting and we'll do the drawing afterwards. So Lee? Or are we looking to break?
Yeah, let's take a 5-minute break. How about right now? So for our Zoom folks, we're going. I guess.
Well, is Brian, are you sticking around, Brian Rooney?
Yeah, I can. I live like 6 blocks away from the brewery here, so.
So I mean, if you want to, you don't have to stick around, but if you want feedback on or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll stick around. It's fine. It's cool.
So let's keep it going. Thank you.
You could just talk here. Hello. Oh yeah. So come back and have your seats, please. Oh, this might be business.
Hey, kitchen people. There are only 3 beers in this tasting. You don't want to miss them. Come in here now. Kitchen people inside. The title slide is up and the beers are about to start going around. The first beer of the tasting is being passed around right now. I have 2 glasses up here. I'm good.
No, it's
All right. So the theme of tonight's tasting, we're just going along with the seminar and drinking more beers that are fermented with bootleg biology yeast strains. Our guests, well, not the one you're drinking. Where's your tasting beer? What are you doing? Why aren't you double fisting it? There's beers going around, man. The first beer went around. Okay, so anyways, bootleg biology. Thank you to Josh and thank you to our guests for coming tonight and having great conversation about yeast and all things beer related. might have given away what local brewery all of these beers are from that we're tasting tonight. We've got 3 different beers, 3 different styles, all brewed with bootleg strains. So that's the theme of tonight's tasting. This first beer that you have is a modern lager with orange blossom honey, clocks in at 5%. I don't know if Brian is, yes, still on the chat. You can probably guess what we're drinking right now, Brian. I don't know if you have anything to add. I just kind of pulled descriptions off the website.
Yeah, this is Jeff was talking about the Franconian Keller lager yeast, and that's the yeast that we use in this, and we love it. We find this one out. It's not we didn't leave it like unfined or anything. We wanted a more polished look to it. But we've done unfiltered pills with their Franconian lager yeast, and we've tried all different types of stuff from a lot of different yeast banks with lager. And this FKL yeast is what he's calling it is awesome. We love it. It's funny, they call it a Keller lager yeast, but it's actually one of the yeasts that like drops out almost the clearest out of all of them that we ever use just on its own. Like we hardly have to use biofine to clear out a little bit in our beers. And this one barely requires any of it. And it's an awesome yeast to work with. I like to ferment it around low 50s. That's what Jeff recommended for it. I'm not familiar with this yeast strain. He still won't tell me where he got it from, so I don't know much about it. He's very tight-lipped about it. He's very protective of it. But this one, we used Weirmann Pilsner malt, Weirmann Carafoam, and some acidulated malt. That's all that's in this. And then in the whirlpool, we hit it with a bunch of orange blossom honey from Florida. And then we used some German hops along the way. We did our bittering schedule the way that we do it with lager. And we spooned the beer during fermentation. We create some natural carbonation in there. I feel that's essential for really, really tight carbonation that's soft and lager beer. And it's kind of what you're drinking here tonight. Trying to think about the hops that are in it. It's, Tettnang, Spalter Select. Those are the 2 that are in there.
Familiar with the term that you had, spunding, what does that mean?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
What's spunding now? Explain spunding.
Yeah, I heard a couple people say, essentially what the fuck's spunding. So if you could explain that.
Yeah, it's a way of like capturing, of course, when yeast is working, it produces alcohol and CO2 during fermentation. And so, of course, the Reinheitsgebot requires that you naturally carbonate your beers. And so there's this device that you have. It's literally like a pressure release valve. And there's homebrew ones that you can buy. I think like Spike Brewing probably makes smaller ones or whatever for like a corny keg or whatever, or any of your smaller fermentation devices. But so what you can do is you can set the bars of pressure. Bars of pressure are relative to PSI essentially. And so we can set the pressure on this device. We hook it up to the blow off arm so that instead of having like a blow off into like a bucket of water or whatever, we're actually slowing down the blow off of CO2. It's like a very small vent off, and it's actually force carbonating the beer while it ferments, if that makes sense. And I think what that does is it gives it a softer texture from a carbonation standpoint. I think we see tinier bubbles in the beer from fermentation versus with forced carbonation, you see those bigger bubbles. I don't know if you can see them with the small samples that you have today, but I also think there's some intangibles we don't know quite enough about when you put certain lager strains under pressure. They ferment a little bit cleaner, a little bit crispier, in my opinion.
So if someone wanted to do that, and they were monitoring kind of where they're on with the fermentation or with their specific gravity at a certain point, where would they start doing that? Obviously, it's probably not something they'd start doing ahead of time. How would you even calculate that as a home brewer?
Well, one of the things I would tell you to do is I would buy the book. God dang, I can't remember the name of it. It's a book about lager. Greg Noonan, who is the owner of the Vermont Pub and Brewery, and that's who John Kimmick, who owns The Alchemist, worked for, which now makes Hetty Topper. But Vermont Pub and Brewery, which is still very much active today in Burlington, Vermont. I've been there. Fantastic freaking beers. He wrote a book on lager, and it's a fantastic book. The more people that I talk to that really know a lot of stuff about lager, it all tracks back to like what this guy was talking about like 20 years ago when he wrote this book. I don't know how he knew all this stuff before everybody else, but he did. He was very studious. You should read that book. It's like something like The Joy of Lager or something like Greg Noonan. You can get it on Amazon. You can buy the book. And he talks about where you should apply Spunding with attenuation. But like I will say, as you get to know your lager strains, you might decide to start it earlier, or you might decide to start it later based on things that you learn about the various yeast strains that you use. And that's part of the fun stuff about lager, is that lager yeasts all have different ways they're treated over the years, wherever they're sourced from, how those originating breweries were working with that yeast. And it's up to us to like figure out how to get the best expression with it in the United States, right? So it's kind of fun.
Thank you. We have moved on to our second beer of the night. I have a slide in here that's been in several of my other presentations that had to do with yeast, just showing the difference between lagers and ales. They like different temperatures. You know, you got the bottom fermenters, top fermenters. They have, generally speaking, different alcohol tolerances. You've seen this before. You'll see it again. So on to our second beer. This one that you are drinking now is an English style dark mild ale, 4%, and it won a gold medal at last year's Great American Beer Festival. So that is what you're enjoying now. And Brian, if there's anything that you want to add to the notes while we're drinking this beer, feel free.
Oh yeah, I had a hunch you might pour that one. So I have it right here next to me also, because I want to try it too while I'm talking about it. This is a beer. It's one of the earliest ones that I made as a home brewer, and then refined it a little bit along the way. But it hasn't changed a lot. And so one of the fun things about being a home brewer and doing it on a commercial level is I was able to try a ton of different yeasts. And I think we went through like 6 different varieties of English strains. And I settled on one when I was a home brewer that I've still carried with us today that we use in this, that I think gives a little bit different character, but all of them still make excellent beer. So it doesn't really matter what you use. It's mostly Maris Otter that's in there as the base malt. And then we use a blend of English and American character malts that are in there. There is chocolate malt that's in it, which I don't know. I think it's somewhat atypical for English mild, dark mild. I don't know a lot of people that are using a lot of chocolate malt in that. And there's one in particular, like there's a certain maltster that I really like with this. And I think it just gives a nice, like round, nutty, chocolatey character. And then we run this beer through a filter actually, and it gets 2 stages of clarification before we package it. It's a very hard yeast to clear out. Like it's one of the least flocculative yeast that we work with in the brewery, and it makes a really good English mild.
I would agree. That's not a style that I normally drink, but I'm thoroughly enjoying it. So I think we have one more left in the tasting. I made another slide of yeast facts just to entertain you. I didn't realize that we were gonna have like the brewer on giving commentary, so I was trying to fill up space. I think most of this I pulled from like BJCP style guidelines or Random Brooks books or other presentations. Can you guys read that? Should I read it? Does it matter? Okay. Did you know attenuation of a particular yeast strain describes its ability to decrease the original gravity of wort upon fermentation? It is commonly listed as a percent in which the numerator is the difference between final gravity and original gravity, and the denominator is original gravity. And I should correct that this is apparent attenuation. Yeah, so determinants of yeast type and strain. The environmental conditions that differ with each yeast type and strain are alcohol tolerance, oxygen requirements, and sensitivity to wort composition. I'm sure that if you watch Jeopardy long enough, that'll be asked sometime, right? Okay, final facts. I like this one a lot. So esters are a byproduct of yeast during the fermentation process. Over 90 esters have been identified, and some beers contain up to 50 esters. I'm guessing those are, I'm not sure where I pulled this from. It was probably a yeast book. It was probably like some sort of Belgian funky stuff, I'm guessing. Also, so we're talking a lot about temperature tonight. A four-fold increase in ester production can be observed by increasing fermentation temperature from 60 to 68 degrees. So like earlier when they were talking about bumping up your fermentation at the end, that's what's going to give you a lot of those ester characteristics in your beer. Yes, Barry.
Talk about attenuation versus perceived attenuation.
No, but I bet Jim can. Shaking his head. Sciencey. The question is attenuation versus perceived attenuation. Can you answer your own question? Was this a setup?
I can tell you it's real.
Josh says it's real. All right. Brian, can I tag team you on this one? Attenuation versus apparent attenuation.
Me?
Perceived. The question was attenuation versus perceived or apparent attenuation. What is the difference?
Boy, I don't know if I know that. I would say if it's saying apparent or perceived, it's a sensory versus like a measurement, but I don't know.
My rudimentary understanding is that like for the actual, not the apparent or perceived, but the real attenuation is like something you got to send it to a lab to get, like bootleg biology. And what we're measuring at home with our hydrometers is apparent attenuation.
Yeah,
that's my understanding.
There is true variation in that. In fact, Anton Parr is manufacturer like great equipment that measures that type of stuff. And they'll even tell you if you talk with them, and we have some of their instrumentation here at our brewery, that versus sending it to a lab and getting a GC run on it and using that stuff, there's still variation on it. It's crazy. It's not a huge amount or anything like that, but it's a smooth number is what I would say when you're looking at finishing gravity and original gravity or Plato or whatever you use.
There's also the OG and the leading factor that we use in there. So there's more, if there's more bitterness in there, you know, even if you have a lower attenuation, if there's more bitterness present, it's perceived a higher one. But there's also particular malts that maltiness has perceived sweetness even when there's not an actual sweetness. And there's other flavor profiles that the brain makes you think it's sweet when it's actually not sweet. So, you know, I think kind of all that goes into it. So the balance of the actual residual sugars and the bitterness units But then also, just some of the different flavors that people can perceive as sweetness when there's no actual sweetness.
That's a great addition. I love that. And you already have my brain wheels turning about future topic. I mean, obviously we'd have to do some yeasty beers and then we can get into attenuation. So this beer you're drinking right now, the third and final one, 7% ABV. It's a New England hazy IPA. I found on Untapped that it is dry hop with Citra Mosaic, Simcoe, and Galaxy, which are some of my favorites. So, I'm assuming that this is not I think you have a Citra specific version of it, and this is just the original version of it.
Yeah, we do. We take each of the components of that dry hop and then we bump them up in different releases. So we have like a Galaxy, a Simcoe, and a Mosaic and a Citra version of it. It all still has the same base dry hopping. Like I said earlier, we dry hop in 2 stages. So a lot of people call that double dry hopping, but then some people will dry hop in 1 stage, but use twice the amount they normally do. So it's all up to whoever you talk to. But for us, our first dry hop is always a blend of Citra, Mosaic, Simcoe, and Galaxy. And then the second stage is a blend also of those in this base one. But if we do Citra, we use more Citra in the second one, significantly more than all of the other components. And same goes for all the other pieces of the variants in that. And that's kind of what this beer is. This is one of the first beers that we started with when we opened BKS, and it's evolved a little bit, both from a malt and in a hop profile standpoint. We've moved around, and we still always move around the hops in this, depending on like how good the Mosaic or the Citra or the Simcoe or the Galaxy is, because hops are ag products and you have to react to them. You can't count on them to be the same every single year. And so, you know, I think about like 2 years ago, we had really amazing Mosaic. And then like this last year, our Citra was a lot better. And so we moved the dial around a little bit to get a desired landing point with the beer. And then the variants showcase whatever those individual hops are.
How do you determine that? Do you do like a test batch or explain that?
No, we don't. We just we do it from sensory on the hops that we buy. And so we started down this path, I'd say about 3.5 years ago. We really started investing in understanding where we're getting our hops from, who the farmers are, keeping inventory of what constitutes a really good like hop selection for us in certain beers, and trying to be, I don't know, I wouldn't say scientific, but at least like categorizing these types of things. And so we've gotten better at it each year to where we're starting to select certain things in hop profiles with Simcoe or Mosaic or Citra. And when I say when we select them, we do have a couple of partners that we work with that help us secure different lots of hops from various farms, and we will go through those and find different things. Like we have Citra that we like in hazy beer, and then we have Citra that we like that works different in like maybe a lager or West Coast IPA. So not all Citra is the same. Not all Mosaic is the same. We wouldn't use some of the Mosaic that we select for say like lager. We would not use it in a hazy beer. We're looking for different flavor and aroma attributes that come from those hops. And we're still pretty young, 6 years into doing this, and we're still trying to figure this out all the time. But that's part of what you do is learning from your selection of these types of things. And so, yeah, we're not Sierra Nevada. We're not trying to like make the same beer every single time. We're trying to deliver the same idea of maybe what you experienced when you had this beer the last time. And the next time you come in, you might find that same experience. And so we're trying to go for that.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm definitely enjoying it. So thank you for also going along with one of the reasons I fell in love with the Lawrence Brewers Guild when I first started coming to meetings was the whole blind tasting thing and not knowing what you were drinking, and then you have the grand reveal at the end. So you played along well with that. So now you all in the audience get to vote on your favorite beer of the 3 that we just tried. So number 1 was the lager, number 2 was the English dark mild, number 3 was the Eddie IPA. Are you ready to vote? Number 1. Whose favorite was number 1? I see 7 votes. Okay, number 2. Maybe like 14 or something. Number 3. Oh. I see someone voting twice and a couple other votes. Well, I think that your gold medal winner was the gold medal winner at the Lawrence Brewers Guild meeting as well.
Gives me hope for the world, actually. It's not our most popular beer, but I know that people who actually are into this type of stuff like kind of dig it, so that's cool.
For sure. So this next slide, just in case you all were wondering, you're not super familiar with the BKS lineup, what we just drank. The first one was the Pivo Project Lager with Orange Blossom and Honey. And I believe this is something you've been working on, like kind of cycling through different adjuncts, for lagers or different ways of doing lagers. That's what you call the Pivo Project.
Yeah, so we have another side of our brewery. We have 7 lager fermenters and 2 lagering tanks that are over on the other side of our brewery from our ale side. And so we just thought it was fun to separate the 2 and like maybe rename it and have like a different idea about how we approach lager, since we're BKS Artisan Ales, I thought it was funny like making lager under that name. And so we just had this like branch off brand that we do that's on the other side. Like if you go into our tasting room, you're ordering a beer, you might see tanks through the back side of where you're ordering beer, and that's where actually all the lager is made. And we just let it like hang out over there. 8 to 10 weeks is kind of like our thing. Like we don't touch the beer. We let it do what it needs to. Give it a lot of cold time, let them get crispy, and try a lot of different yeast strains and do a lot of different fun stuff. We're still trying to figure out like the world of lager. It's kind of a fun thing for us right now, and we're really enjoying it.
Do you hear that from the audience? Said you're doing it well. And also, since I see Angelo on Zoom still, I'm just going to say crispy boys. So then the second one was the Rock Hill and Locust English Mild Ale, which was the gold medal winner at GABF and tonight. And then the third one was the Counterculture IPA. And if you remember, he was talking about those 4 variations of hops that they have in there, they'll do. So like I just ordered these online, and thank you, Genelia, for picking them up because I couldn't make it to Kansas City this weekend. Yeah. But yeah, so now they also have a Citra version out as well, along with the normal Counterculture. And if you haven't been to BKS, I would encourage you to go next time you're in Kansas City. I think, okay, next month, it's like Valentine-y stuff. So we're going to do a chocolate and beer pairing. We'll have a variety of styles of beer. We're going to have chocolates. It's going to be great. We're going to express our love for beer. And then I know that I mentioned this, I think it was maybe like October, we did the various like hop dosages. I still want to do a smash beer similar to what you and Jared and Angela did. I don't know if Jared and Angela are still on Zoom. But I'm sure other people could accommodate this. If we could just make like a big batch of something really basic. And then my vision here is to get the same hop variety grown in different regions so that we can see if we can taste a regional variation in the hops. Chris.
Brian and Mary.
Most definitely. Thank you so much, Brian and Mary. And Yeah, really enjoyed the beers. Thanks for sharing them.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it. Good time. Got to have some beers and hang out. Fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.